Welcome to our Wednesday night live. Brian Neubert will be joining me shortly, very shortly, but we want to thank our sponsors, and that, of course, being the good folks at acrepro.com who have sponsored us throughout the season. Done a lot with football, obviously, with Tom Dienhart, and Brian's joined us for some shows, and we should have a good one tonight. We'll take your questions for about the next half hour, 45 minutes, as we look forward to Purdue and Houston Friday night. Brian's thrilled that it's 10 after 10. It'll be about 10:45 before that game tips, I'm going to guess. But let's talk a little bit acrepro.com. When it comes to land sales, it pays to have experts in your corner. AcrePro Midwest Farm Group are your local farmland specialists. With decades of experience in Indiana agriculture, no one knows the market better. Whether you're doing a 1031 exchange or simply buying and selling farmland, your local AcrePro agent will walk the land with you and ensure the deal is right. Visit acrepro.com or call Kyle Spray or the good folks there at 765-775-6502 or talk to your local land expert, of course, that being Kyle and his staff. Again, that number 765-775-6502. All right, we will bring in Mr. Neubert to you haven't had a whole lot to do here the last few weeks. It's been a lot of travel, a lot of certainly good experience last week for Purdue in Providence, and the Boilermakers get the 2 wins. Now it gets not that it wasn't difficult there; it gets extremely difficult when the Houston Cougars come calling at your favorite start time, sometime after 10 o'clock Friday night.
It'll be 10:45 probably.
Yeah. Over under on that is right on, I think. But go ahead. What do you think? I mean, what do you think?
A few years back, I covered an NCAA tournament game that started at 10:45 p.m. and you haven't lived. There is no greater experience in this world than being locked in a Hartford, Connecticut parking garage at 4 o'clock in the morning and have to figure your way out of it. And that's exactly what happened that night to me and a couple of colleagues who I was driving back to their hotel. Anyway, hopefully that won't happen.
Well, what Hartford? Who did they?
They beat? So the first game against Old Dominion.
Oh, that's right. And then they beat Villanova.
Yeah, that was the late game.
Yeah.
And Nogel Eastern tore his Achilles before the game, and then was fine at halftime because in the arena in Hartford where the Wi-Fi didn't work. The floor was also slick because of the ice underneath it, I guess. Just a really big time NCAA tournament experience there in Hartford. Hopefully this one goes better for all of us. But 10:45 at night is not going to be fun.
Yeah, that is a late night any way you slice it, and I'd like to say I feel your pain, but you operate well at night, so maybe that'll make it something that's going to work well. Who knows? But
well, the funny part of it is like we all hurry to write these stories and provide coverage and stuff, and all of our people are in bed or jail, one or the other. So
and or jail and or jail.
It's kind of futile, but it is what it is.
Yeah, but there is nothing like your drive home at that time of night, or when you announce what time it is that you're doing your rap video. That's pretty priceless stuff, to say the least. At least for the viewer and the reader, and I'm always amazed at how coherent you put all this in. It's pretty good from that standpoint. All right, let's look at this game, and it's
coherent.
Yeah, I know. Let's look at this game, though. Purdue 7.5-point underdog. Almost nobody giving Purdue much of a chance. I mean, I think Purdue is not the biggest underdog, though, the Sweet 16 games. Interestingly, I think Michigan is a bigger underdog against Duke, and there may be one other one in there. But a steep climb for Purdue. You have written before that this is a team that back before we knew Purdue was going to play, that Purdue may not want to run into. They're going to run into them, but what do you know about Houston? But also, what challenges not only do they bring, but what can Purdue do to combat it?
Well, I didn't just say that about this year. I've said that for like 5 years now.
Yeah.
that if there's anybody Purdue should want no part of in the NCAA tournament, it's Houston, because they have the same team every single year. Somehow, some way, they've got grown men all over the floor. They play 100 miles an hour. They seem like they have 8 guys on the floor defensively at all times. I just wrote in my column that I just posted at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday for some reason, that they figured out a way to double team every position all the time, every game. Purdue's just going to have to be super poised. It's going to be more about what the guy who gets the ball after it's forced out of Braden Smith's or Trey Kaufman-Ryan's hands, what that guy does with it, whether that's Fletcher Lawyer, whether that's Sha'Carri Harris, whether that's CJ Cox, Miles Colden, Camden Heide, whoever it might be. It's chances are Houston's going to make it really hard for Purdue's best players to beat them. Yeah. Braden Smith is pretty good at being ready for anything. And I think this is the game where they're going to hedge him, they're going to trap him, and they're going to chase him to half court to the best of their ability. They're going to try to force him into turnovers. They're going to be super physical, super aggressive, and super long. So you got to watch out for those, pick 6 turnovers that can change games. And you have to worry about a Houston team that's number 1 nationally in 3-point shooting percentage.
Yeah.
How often do you see that mix? Number 1 in the country defensively and number 1 in 3-point shooting. Normally it's one or the other, because really good defensive rosters typically aren't very skilled, and very skilled rosters typically aren't very good defensively. Somehow they've got the best of both worlds, and that's really remarkable, but also really scary. Scary. This is an opponent that, is replacing Kansas basically as the class of the Big 12. And again, I've always argued that in terms of who's the best coach in college basketball, I've always thought you could make a hell of a case for Kelvin Samson. He is unbelievable. He does an unbelievable job, and he's now getting to the point where he's getting these absolute studs every year. But he's not done this at Houston with plug and play All-Americans like Kansas, Duke, North Carolina, etc. He's doing it with grinders, his types of guys. And he was out in the forefront getting transfers and bringing them in, but he gets them to buy into his system, buy into his style of play entirely. It's almost like what Bob Huggins was back in the 90s, where you just get these dudes and they just play their asses off for this guy. And pardon my French.
No, it's okay. It's the
and it is just, it is the ultimate test for Purdue this season. And Purdue played Auburn. And Purdue played Texas A&M, and Purdue's played teams that are like this, but I don't think they've ever played anybody who's as good at being like this as Houston is.
Yeah, I had the chance to see them in person last year at Kansas, and Kansas beat them in that game, and all I remember is, and Kansas had one of the best games offensively they had all year. But just how fired up Samson was when they made the littlest defensive mistake.
Mm-hmm.
He came out of his skin on the sidelines. He's got some Gene Cady in him, or to say the least. He gets after it, and his teams are extremely disciplined in a lot of different ways. And I think that's what's going to make it a chance. We got lots of questions today, and one that you already hit on, Brian. What are the keys to pulling off the Houston upset? Mike, the shooting over 40% from 3, maybe so, but it's going to be difficult for, Purdue's got to somehow. Does Purdue have a chance to get out in transition, to get transition threes? Again, this is a team that Houston doesn't allow that a lot. What do you think about that? Is that, if you were going to put a formula to win, is it under 10 turnovers and over 40% from 3? Is that? I know nothing's that simple, but how do you look at that?
Well, the turnover number is the atom bomb in all of this. If you can't turn the ball over and win, it's impossible in this game. It's just not happening. If Purdue's not under 10 turnovers, it's going to lose, and maybe lose big. I think 3-point shooting is obviously an easy answer.
Yeah.
Because when people pressure the way Houston's going to pressure, whether that's 2 people on Braden Smith, whether that's 2 people off Trey Kaufman-Ryan, somebody's open. Now, against Houston, they're not open very long, but somebody's open. And if the next guy makes the right play, makes the right pass, the ball gets to where it needs to be, there's going to be open shots. So if Purdue, can make those open shots at a pretty high rate, that would seem like a must for any sort of winning formula that might be attainable in this game. The other thing, defensive rebounding, is an area where Purdue has had to overachieve all year long. They were unbelievable in Providence, like best case scenario.
Right.
Like you were twice what you normally are as a rebounding team in those 2 games in Providence. But doing it against High Point, doing it against McNeese State, and doing it against Houston are 2 entirely different things. So that's another area where Purdue has to survive, and an area where the game can get away from Purdue if it's not really careful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then some. It's just, and they make it so difficult in that light of being able to navigate through them without turning the ball over. And like you said, those pick six are going to be absolutely key. All right, a question that you're going to remember because you were covering. I think you'll remember. And I remember because Kelvin Samson spent 3 years in Indiana. All Purdue fans know that and did. They were pretty darn good. But why and when Kelvin Samson was fired, at least it wasn't Kevin Samson, but Kelvin Samson was fired by RU. He was fired in the 2000, and we're making reference to Samson, Kelvin Samson, talking about his kind of lambasting, or his pet peeve being that people called it Gonzaga, not Gonzaga, or Gonzaga, not Gonzaga. And people, he said, you wouldn't call me Kevin Samson, would you? Well, you might, but talk about, I don't know what you remember about that. That obviously there was
I remember everything.
Recruiting issue involved with text messages. I remember the great Dan Dockich, if we're using that term loosely, took over for them a little bit down the stretch, if that's right. But it was a tough time for Indiana when they had to let him go in 2008.
Well, what I will say is, what Kelvin Samson was fired for and what he was caught for and what he was fired for might have been 2 very different things, because he was caught basically making illegal phone calls and sending illegal text messages and whatever else. Jeff Meyer gave Derek Elson a T-shirt when he wasn't supposed to, little stuff like that now is like a punchline.
Yeah.
Considering you got schools out there giving dudes bags of money. That's what he was caught for, and subsequently terminated because this flew in the face of things he'd already gotten in trouble for.
Right.
But there was stuff going on there too that, very easily could have blown up on that whole program. For as much as Dan Dockich has gotten sideways with his alma mater in some ways, they owe him a debt of gratitude, because he knows where the bodies are buried, guys. He took that job over for a couple months after Kelvin Samson was gone, and he dealt with the sort of people that Kelvin Samson was bringing to that program. And it just was not a terribly healthy environment based on everything I not only know, but have heard, but have seen. I know a lot of those dudes from recruiting and things like that. And we're talking about some things that were really, really ugly in terms of criminality and things like that, and just violence. And it was just not a sustainable situation. I think if that had gone on as good as things were going for that 1 year for Kelvin Samson at IU when he had Eric Gordon, which might be a whole other story. I mean, who knows what they did to get Eric Gordon, but for as much as good as things were going, there was a real undercurrent of, God, how is this going to end type of stuff. And, winning's all that matters. And he was winning at a very high level. But I don't know how sustainable his model of bringing in a certain type of character into Indiana's program was going to end up being. So that's kind of where I'll leave it. Dan Dockich knows all of it. And, he was there for some of the appalling stories that tend to go around. They might have originated with him for all I know, but he has been a good soldier for IU. He could have come out and talked to media after he was fired. He could have used his provocative platform now to just burn it all down, and he never has. And I think IU kind of owes him for that. I assume he didn't have to sign an NDA of any kind, but I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah, I don't know either. At the end of that, when he left after the 8th season, and they hired Tom Crean after that, right?
Yes.
In 2009, and I'm not sure. But I'm sure you're right. Dan gets a lot of guff for a lot of things, and some of it's deserved. But that's an interesting take on that. All right, a question. Do you think Kelvin remembers his second round defeat to Purdue in 2000? I don't know. Were you out in
I don't
Tucson?
know if I remember their second round defeat.
Yes, with
defeat
Oklahoma.
Purdue in 2000.
Purdue
that
beat,
was Eduardo Nahara, right, against Brian
right.
Thomas.
And
I guess I do remember it. I wasn't there. I wasn't covering them at the time.
Right. I know Jerron Cornell hits 3 free throws down the stretch. Purdue beats Dayton to open the tournament barely by the hair of its chinny chin chin, so to speak. They beat Oklahoma and again, I know Jerron Cornell hit three free throws. I remember he was the cover of our magazine. And of course, Purdue went on to that was in Tucson. They went on to Albuquerque, and of course, got to the Elite Eight before losing to Wisconsin. They beat Gonzaga and lost to the Badgers before the Badgers got their first. That was the last year, Brian. The Big Ten won the NCAA tournament. Michigan State obviously ended up winning that tournament. A question is a side question about that. Of the 16 teams left, do you see a Big Ten team getting Michigan State?
No.
As a 2 seed, I suppose. With Purdue, Michigan State, Maryland still left. Any four? If you were going to handicap the one that has the best chance of breaking through, what do you think?
I like Maryland, but they just skated by Colorado State. Not that means that's what's going to happen every game, but I just think Queen and Julian Reese are so hard to match up with, and they shoot the ball so well that's the team I'd be kind of scared of. I think Michigan State deserves a tremendous amount of credit for the season they've had.
Yeah.
But I also think that they've probably squeezed as much juice out of the orange as they can get. And I can't even remember who they're playing this weekend. They
beat New Mexico. Now I'm drawing a complete blank of who they're playing, but they've got to play. I'll look it up here just to make sure. They're in the South region. That much I know. It is, you're right. They handled things pretty well for the most part. So the game was certainly close against New Mexico, but it was Auburn's got Michigan, Ole Miss, Michigan State, and Ole Miss and Michigan State. And you saw Ole Miss in person, and Chris Beard certainly, and of course Maryland has Florida. Texas Tech, Arkansas, obviously Tennessee, Kentucky, Purdue, Houston, BYU, Alabama, Duke, Arizona. But my point is, Ole Miss, I thought at that time was a Sweet 16 team. They ended up being correct when they thrashed Iowa State. They will give Michigan State all they can handle, I would think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just think Michigan State, unless Jace Richardson is really, really good, I think they have just some natural limitations that they have overcome all season long to get to where they've gotten. I think they've overachieved. I think this has been the classic Izzo resurgence team that has just been a great team together, probably better than the sum of its parts. But their great teams in the past have always had a dude, a star, right? And I guess maybe I'm making too much of this because I thought that Michigan State would fall apart at the end of the Big Ten season. Ended up winning the league by a couple of games. But I just think that there's something they don't have that will kind of lower their ceiling in these last 2 weekends of the NCAA tournament. I don't think the Big Ten. I think the Big Ten went all year without having that team that was going to be a real Final Four contender. I think it became evident pretty early that Purdue was going to have some real limitations to overcome. And that obviously proved to be true. Michigan was a surprise to everybody, but I just don't see them, having it in them to get, maybe not past the Sweet 16, certainly not the Elite Eight. But I've been wrong about them too. I thought they were done at the end of the regular season, and they won the Big Ten tournament. So maybe that was their highlight. I don't know.
Yeah, they played Bruce Pearl and Auburn, and Auburn has done funny things in the tournament under Bruce Pearl, but and kind of like Purdue in a different situation, but like Purdue has struggled down the stretch. But Donaldson and company and Michigan's backcourt's going to have to play at the level they did play to some extent early on in the Big Ten tournament and in the first 2 rounds of the NCAA. But I'm not sure I'm seeing that one either. Jeff. The
thing I kind of wondered about with Maryland was whether or not Derek Queen had like a Carmelo Anthony story in him.
Yeah,
and he obviously beat Colorado State with that shot over our poor friend Ethan Morton, who played unbelievable defense on that.
Well defended,
very well defended, perfectly defended, and he scored anyway. So poor Ethan Morton, but he has nothing to be ashamed of.
No, he was. I loved watching Ethan play for that team because he did a lot of the same things he did for Purdue last year, where he was sixth, seventh man, just came in, and Colorado State. It was too bad that didn't work out for them, but it got another Big Ten team in there. There a question here that and Brian will have an opinion on this also. I have one as well. Do you think Indy will be a home court advantage, being that Tennessee and Kentucky fans are buying up the tickets? I'll start, and I think it's an interesting dynamic. Again, that 10:30 game following Kentucky, Tennessee will be interesting to see. People will hang around how motivated they'll be to, Purdue could benefit from the underdog effect, I assume, or possibly if they could mount a challenge.
Not from Tennessee fans. Are you kidding?
Yeah, I don't think Tennessee fans just didn't see Purdue go away. But Tennessee fans might want to. I've talked to some Tennessee fans this week that said they would like to play Purdue again, and I think Purdue would happily take a rematch and be an underdog in that game. But it'll be interesting. I do think that the Kentucky Tennessee effect is having effect on the whole. Not only the ticket marketing, everything that's going down in downtown Indy. There will be a swarm. I mean, UK, they travel like crazy. They buy up everything. Tennessee, it tends to do the same thing. It's going to be interesting. That will be an interesting first game. I mean, what else do you have? Anything else you have to add to the phrase?
Yeah, I kind of think this might be an unpopular opinion, but I've always thought the home court advantage thing in Indy is overblown.
Mm-hmm.
I think that where you see Purdue have unexpected home court advantages is when you get to the second weekend and you're in Louisville or you're in Detroit. Those are the places where Purdue fans travel so well they can take those places over. That and in November at MTEs on the coast, because Purdue has so many alums in big cities out west and out east that when they go to Washington for a Big Ten game, there's 10,000 Purdue fans there, it seemed like. When they go to play in a Thanksgiving tournament in Maui, or they go to a Thanksgiving tournament in San Diego, or they go to a Thanksgiving tournament in Charleston, whatever it might be, that's where Purdue, the nationwide following, or the nationwide expanse of its alumni base, that's when it really shows up. How often does Purdue really have a huge difference-making home court advantage in what they call the Indy Classic now? It was the Crossroads before, but the Crossroads was a little bit different because you had all the in-state schools there. I just don't think it's that big a deal. Did Purdue have a huge advantage against Texas A&M? Did Purdue have a huge advantage in the Big Ten tournament? I don't think so.
You were there, so and yet, what was it like at Providence in terms of? I mean, you could see on TV But we've got a question from a friend of the show that from that was in Providence. But what was it like from your perspective in terms of the
Yeah, I didn't feel like Purdue had a huge advantage out there in either game. I think though that when it played those two low majors, they had a small but such an enthusiastic following. They were so excited to be there that they were louder per capita than it was probably like one McNeese State fan was probably the equivalent of two Purdue fans in terms of making themselves known. So it might have been a little deceiving there, but it didn't seem like anything outside the ordinary for Purdue in terms of its following. But I'm not saying there weren't a lot of Purdue fans there.
There were.
I'm just saying I don't think it was anything out of the ordinary.
High Point, I was concerned, and even maybe to some extent McNeese had that game turned down the stretch, that the whole place would, like it was with St. Peter's in Philly, where Purdue was basically cornered by everybody became a St. Peter's fan. Not that caused Purdue to lose in that Sweet 16 matchup 3 years ago, but that effect could have happened, I suppose. And that's here we have a very good question from our friend Rolland, who says, what game from the season after the Auburn game did you see Purdue play well or succeed against the same kind of challenges we'll see on Friday? I'll leave that to you, Brian. That's a good question. I'm not sure we have a positive answer here, but what do you think? You're pondering.
What game from this season after the
Auburn game? Did they have a game where you felt like, boy, they can compete this level?
They played well against UCLA.
Yeah.
And I think UCLA was good. And that
was physical.
Was a home game, obviously.
Yeah.
But I thought they played really well in that game. I think when you look at their losses on the road, they played well enough to win all those games. At least for 20 to 30 minutes. I think they played well enough to win at Michigan. I think they played a good 20 minutes at IU.
Yeah.
I think they played a good 35 minutes at Illinois, for the most part. So it's not like when Purdue lost, they were getting their doors blown off. I thought they played outside. It was just the turnovers at Michigan State. Outside of that, you did everything right. So if you could kind of combine all the positives from those losses, I think you saw a lot of the best of Purdue there. But I think, part of the reason you just mentioned before, had those games in Providence turn toward High Point or McNeese State at any point, the crowd might have also. It just was never going to happen because Purdue was so good in those two games that High Point and McNeese never really had a chance. I understand that there were moments against High Point where that game was down to 3 points in the second half, but there was no moment in that game where it wasn't crystal clear that Purdue was going to win that game. And the McNeese game, what did they win by 14?
14, but they
was essentially a 25.
Went on a 20 or 17-2 run right down the stretch.
That was essentially a 25-point win. I think the High Point game was also like 14 points. I think that was essentially a 20-point win, even though it was relatively close technically in the second half. I think Purdue was that much better than both of those two teams. I know nobody's going to beat their chests over beating two low major programs, decidedly, but those were two low major programs that came in, drunk on winning, so to speak. That was all they knew all season long. And teams like that are dangerous because they come in with a swagger to them that you either have to match or you have to beat out of them. And Purdue beat it out of both of them.
Yeah.
And that's where things went sideways against St. Peter's, and that's where things went sideways against Fairleigh, was the swagger that those teams had built up, affected Purdue, and Purdue was never able to match it or beat it out of them. I thought these two games were the exact opposite. Purdue just gave them no chance, and that's why those games unfolded the way they did.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that on that front. And I think it's got to, again, I think we're in agreement on one topic, and that is that Purdue's going to have to play near perfectly to get the job done. Was Alabama Purdue's best performance of the year? I don't know. Alabama obviously also a different team than Houston, though Alabama beat Houston. As you know, Houston was 3-3 to start the season, then they lost just one more game out of their last 29 games. So it's been a pretty impressive run for Kelvin Samson's group. And I think that part of it is important to understand that you're going to be also you need to be you're going to have to play about as well as you can. Go ahead.
The other part of it too is like what happened in November doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah,
that might as well have been last season. So I think you look at Houston as the team that's lost once since Christmas, or whatever it is, instead of the team that lost 4 games this year. Which is, kind of the same thing you can say about Purdue. It's now obviously they didn't close the regular season the way you wanted them to. But I think if you look at Purdue based on what Purdue was in Providence, Purdue looks very different than its record.
Yeah.
So I always think that's kind of the best approach to viewing the NCAA tournament is what are they right now? What have they been for the last few weeks? What have they been in the last 2 games? Things like that. And I think Purdue's probably better than its record, but I think Houston is just as good as its record.
Yeah. Style of play is an interesting thing. And Golden Black consultant Jeff Ball, who happens to be tuning in tonight, just as Houston played anybody that is like Purdue. Now, they don't play in the SEC, but they certainly played. And I don't know that I pretend to be an expert on the Big 12, but is there anything that, and this is maybe an impossible question to answer, but is there anything that Purdue can do that really will cause Houston problems? Houston's so good defensively. They shoot the three, like we mentioned, tops in the country. But what can Purdue do? Is there any matchup advantages for Purdue in this game? Is it Trey Kaufman run the way he can? He's going to be running into 2 or 3 guys that are going to cause him problems down there, one would think. But how do you look at that from that matchup?
Well, Purdue's got the best point guard in the country.
Yeah.
And I think that there's no opponent against which that's not an advantage. Now, obviously, Houston's defense is built to really make things hard on point guards, if not take them away entirely. But if there's anybody who can figure out as he goes, and if there's anybody who can hit the right pressure points, Purdue's got that guy. And I think that's a big deal and something Houston has to do everything in its power to build their scheme around really, really getting the ball out of Braden Smith's hands. After that, where Purdue's advantages can lie, if they can get Trey Kaufman run one-on-one against somebody, I think Purdue would take that every single time. But you're going to have to be quick. You're going to have to be decisive and things like that because open shots, open passes don't stay open very long against these guys because, as I said before, they look like they have 8 guys on the floor defensively most of the time.
Yeah, and they have some depth as well. All right, you mentioned earlier C.J. Cox and Jakari Harris both did good things. They both did good things in Providence. Cox had about 11 points and hit a couple big shots. Not that game ever got close, but I think they got it. They being McNeese gets it down to 16 points. He hits a 3, but those are guys that are going to have to come of age also in this game. And in what way, if they do come of age, is it important for them to do so? Is it just handling the ball and making the right decisions and hitting a couple big shots? What do you see for those two? Because it seems to me that that will be a factor. If Purdue's going to pull the upset, those guys are going to have to really contribute as well.
Well, what were we talking about in December about Purdue's limitations?
Yeah,
Daniel Jacobson, the breadth of his injury, his loss hadn't really surfaced yet. The issue for Purdue at like Penn State and Marquette was they didn't have that secondary ball handler that could help them against pressure. Well, this is now that game where 2 people might pick up Braden Smith at half court. He has to get it off to somebody else, and then that player has to bring it up, and that player has to make the best decision possible with a numbers advantage, theoretically, provided Houston hasn't recovered and gotten back into its half-court defense. So those guys are going to have to be really composed. They're going to have to be really smart. They're going to have to be really decisive, and they're just going to have to make the right plays. And I think that they've come a long way, both of them, in that regard through the course of the year, but they are still freshmen, and they are two freshmen who have never seen anything like Houston before. You remember the Auburn game? They both really struggled in that game, if I recall correctly. But they're both smart guys. They've both gotten much better, and they're both probably in a much better position to do the things they need to do in this game versus where they were 3 months ago. So I don't think it would be a concern for me if I were Purdue, but I don't know if it would be the top of the list in terms of concerns. But it's certainly something to watch.
Yeah.
Oh, Purdue has been moving Braden Smith off the ball more.
Yes.
And having one of those
Why
guys.
do you think that is? What's the plan? What's behind that?
They're trying to give him 15 seconds off from the
Yeah.
labor intensiveness of bringing the ball up to try to save his legs a little bit for the end of games. But also, I think it's just to kind of throw off opponents, the defensive game plans, what they want to do against him. I think he's also good enough to play off the ball. You've seen what he's done as a catch and shoot guy in the corner. He's made a bunch of threes, and he can do that. And if you run a different type of offense to feature him that way, it can be just as effective as him having the ball and doing everything himself. But even if he's off the ball, they're going to want to get him in ball screens and things like that. It's just they just kind of want to manage him a little bit, and I think that's something you could see a lot of in this game too, provided Jakari Harris and CJ Cox, can handle the responsibility of bringing the ball up. Now, the initial Houston defenders who would be pressuring Braden Smith, if Jakari Harris or CJ Cox is bringing the ball up, those guys are probably going to be with Braden Smith. They're probably going to stay with him. They're not going to switch up their matchups just to make sure that this guy is pressuring the ball and this guy's guarding away from the ball. That would seem like something that would play against Houston's strengths. So if you want to take away Houston's best on-ball defense, if you want to kind of break up its structure of who's hedging and who's trapping and things like that, using Braden Smith as a red herring might be a winning formula for all we know. So that's something to keep an eye on too.
Yeah. All storylines that are going to be interesting to watch as we did. All right, I want to thank our folks at acrepro.com. We're going to take a couple more questions and we appreciate everybody's discussions. Now, we did get a comment, and I don't know. I know you'll have media availability tomorrow. Yeah, talk about a little bit about your schedule for Thursday. And in Indianapolis, you and Mike Carmen both. I don't know if Mike will be there tomorrow, but Mike will be there on Friday. But we'll talk about what the schedule is, because there is open practice too tomorrow.
Well, we kind of fly by the seat of our pants. The things I like to do the days before these games, I hope people find value in it. But I talked to both of Purdue's assistant coaches for offense and defense to give us
great stuff. If you haven't
their
watched
scouting report on the opponent, and then just talk to whatever players we can in the open locker room. Don't even go to press conferences. I don't know if people realize that, but the press conferences are just for show, basically. And the real value from media perspectives in the open locker room, which we don't get very often during the regular season. That's one of the nice parts of the postseason. You can actually have human conversations with people and, get a lot of different guys in a short period of time. And I'm sure we'll do something talking to Purdue's players about Houston's defense and things like that. And we'll try to find, some other random stuff to write about. But we'll have lots of stuff from down there starting tomorrow. And then obviously our normal preview on game day that can sit on our website for 12 hours before the game.
if not longer. So
with it being a 10 p.m. tip, we'll probably bank some stuff for Friday afternoon too. Basically the way it works, I think you asked this, but I don't remember. We go down there. Purdue has its open practice, which is basically a chance for us to confirm that Purdue will in fact be shooting jump shots. I assume Purdue is practicing off-site. But I can't remember how it works in the second round, whether or not they close the facility. because they have all of those open practices the same day. So Purdue can't have that court for its entire practice. So they'll have to go somewhere off site to have their real practice, as will everybody else at this regional. But right after their open practice, Purdue will have its press conference and its open locker room running at the same time. And Houston will follow after that. So we'll get as much as we can up from Purdue before we go cover Houston too.
Yeah.
Which is much more relevant in the later rounds of this tournament than, like, I don't think anybody really wanted to read all that much about McNeese State's best player. Like, I don't even know who that would have been, to be honest with you. So we kind of let that slide a little bit, focus more on Purdue and Providence. But we'll do a little bit more on Houston here tomorrow and into Friday. So that's kind of how it works. It is a long day.
Yeah.
We'll get there. I'll probably get to the stadium at 11 a.m. or so, and I'll probably be there until 7 p.m. Which isn't, I mean, it's not like I'm sitting in a tank somewhere in Iraq. I mean, I get paid to watch basketball. I'm not complaining. It is a long day.
It is a long day. You've been through the ringer through all. Say one quick question before we come to a close. I want to clarify because and things could have changed. Burgess is going to have to play over Berg. Raleigh Burgess, we're talking about the freshman, has had shin splints, I believe has been the term.
He's hurt.
And he will not play.
He is dressing to play, but I don't know if he can play.
Yeah.
And the fact that he has not come into any of these games probably tells you what you need to know there. Now, that being said, Will Berg played awesome against High Point. He was great. So Will Berg earned it in that game. And then he earned an opportunity against McNeese 2 days later. But that Burgess didn't come in at all in Providence. And I can't remember, did he play in the Big Ten tournament?
I think he did play briefly, very briefly.
That's what I've been talking about all season long about the things Purdue has to overcome is you have very little depth in your front court here. You have very little functional depth in your front court. That's why Trey Kaufman-Wren picking up one foul, in the first few minutes of the game is like the equivalent of him picking up three, is that you can't afford to risk him because your options are so limited. And, I think Purdue really hoped that playing Raleigh Burgess this season instead of redshirting him would create a situation where he was at his best later in the season because experience would be helping him. But now he's hurt. He's got these shin splints. He's walking around in a boot. And obviously Purdue's not playing him at all. So it's pretty evident that the best laid plans. Your best, it is really important for Purdue. It has been all along that next season you get the best of Raleigh Burgess and you get a healthy Daniel Jacobson. And right now the two of them have two good legs between them. And it's been kind of unfortunate for Purdue in that sense. But that's kind of the breaks of the game. And to Caleb First's credit, he's really stepped up this season. He's not been perfect. He's not been as consistent as you'd always like, but he's really helped them. He saved them from what could have been a really bad situation. Camden Heide right now is playing his best basketball this season. Miles Colvin had to play the 4 a little bit against McNeese because it was a 4-guard situation they had to match up with. So Purdue's kind of had to piecemeal all this together. And this is kind of the situation that I just wrote in my column. Purdue can't be in next year. They have a silver bullet opportunity here next year with what they have presumably coming back. And they have to address some of this stuff with the portal. They have to go get some real functional size to go along with Daniel Jacobson to put next to Trey Kaufman-Wren, to not put him in the situation he was in this year where you're counting on him to be your best defensive rebounder when he's playing against guys who are 7 feet across the board like he was at Michigan, against Michigan. He's not a rim protector whatsoever, but he's in that defensive role where that's what you want that position to be. And he's just not that. He's a great player, but he is not what Purdue needed to fill some of the gaps that it experienced this season. And next year has to be different. They need to go out and get a really, really legitimate, big guy to go along with Daniel Jacobson, not to replace Daniel Jacobson, not to necessarily cannibalize Daniel Jacobson, to play with Daniel Jacobson. Those two guys as a tandem, it's just an absolute must.
All right. Last question. Speaking of the portal, not to open up a whole can of worms, but that can of worms is open now, as fans know. Men's basketball, the portal open, I think, as of Monday. It does. And Matt Painter's even talked about that in the press conference in the NCAA tournament about, yes, if Purdue doesn't make it to the Final Four, they'll be busy just shoring up your roster, making sure you got everybody that you're going to have your exit interviews or at least your postseason meetings quickly after the season. But again, there's no reason to believe that this roster is not going to be back at the level that's going to be. There may be a surprise in there. Who knows? But you still have that same. I know you said that last week. You still feeling that way in terms of the portal in Purdue?
Yeah, I think Purdue will lose some guys. I think they'll lose guys who want to play more. I would be very surprised if, Purdue lost anybody for any other reason than that. I think there's a misnomer out there, and I do want to say this because I'm kicking myself because I did a radio show in Indianapolis this morning and didn't make this very important point, is that, there's a misnomer out there that Purdue doesn't have any money. That is not true whatsoever. Purdue's guys are doing well. They're going to do well in revenue sharing. Purdue has committed to maxing out its allowance of money they can pay their athletes to and pay to their athletes. Sorry, I'm starting to get a little cobwebbed here. I think that Purdue's basketball players are going to do fine. They're doing fine right now. Braden Smith is not going to sleep hungry at night. I promise you that. Trey Kaufman is not going to bed at night hungry. Fletcher Lawyer is not going to bed at night hungry. Those guys are doing well. And Braden Smith, this time a year from now, this time right now, probably, we're talking like, if I don't know the numbers, nor will anyone ever tell me, nor do a lot of people even know. But
yeah, there's a lot of conjecture out there. Yeah,
Braden Smith, if he's not already, is going to be making Zach Edey money next year. There's no question in my mind, and I think that people don't view Purdue that way. People view Purdue as not having a lot of money, being cheap, having a football program that doesn't max out its revenue by being really, really good, stuff like that. And I don't necessarily think that's fully reflective of reality. So I don't think there are good reasons for any of Purdue's best players to really leave. That doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's a good player right now couldn't think, hey, I can get way more role or way more responsibility or way more of an opportunity somewhere else. I might be Purdue's sixth best player right now. Maybe I can go be somebody else's second or third. That's possible, but you also have to understand that, the grass isn't always greener. And, the Purdue degree, the money that's going to be at Purdue, that stuff's all there. I think guys these days have to be very careful to not think so strongly that the situation might be better, right, that they don't realize how good they have it right now. It's possible I'm kind of too close to all of this sometimes, and but they've got a pretty good life, and they've got a good team to play on. They have a great coaching staff to play for that seems to do right by their players at every turn. Based on my observations anyway. I mean, obviously it's not a popularity contest, that coaches have to win. But as guys get older, they tend to appreciate that more than they do in the moment. So you just never know. I'm serving you word salad right now. So I should just shut up.
But on that note, that's dessert here for Wednesday Night Live, but appreciate it. We'll wait and see on that whole front. It is, as Brian has documented many times, it is, we know it's a new world in the world of college sports and not all to the good, but Purdue is in a position to have a very, very good basketball team next year. It has a good one this year. We'll see what happens on Friday night when Purdue takes on Houston at that 10:09 starting time. And FanDuel, I know, is a sponsor. You could take the over-under on that 10:09.
I was going to say that should be on the board.
Yeah. The over-under, I would say 10:39, but or 10:20. It depends how, if Tennessee and Kentucky goes to 4 overtimes, it could be 11 o'clock. Let's hope not from that standpoint. But Brian, thanks for all your work this year. We've had people on the chat tonight that want to say that make that expressly said to you that all the work you've done this year has been terrific. And if you're a Purdue fan, you hope it goes on for another 2 weeks. But no matter what happens, there'll be a lot of basketball coverage, not only now through the next few weeks and into camp season, so to speak, when Brian hits the road as well. So we'll look forward to that. All right, Brian, we'll let you go. Thanks again. I will thank our sponsor. And that, of course, being acrepro.com. We appreciate them, Kyle Spray and the good folks there. You can visit acrepro.com or call 765-775-6502 or talk to your local land expert today, because Brian may not be doing a 1031 exchange tomorrow, but you might be. And if you are,
I think 7 today alone.
Well, you did 7 of them. God,
yeah.
your money, money's good for you. And
where do you think I've been all day?
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
Now walking the fields.
Yeah, but you're going to
deals.
You're going to be doing some dealing, and you can survey the fields on the way between West Lafayette and Indianapolis tomorrow. All right, have a great rest of your evening. Now, if you missed part of the show, we'll have it. It'll be obviously recorded on YouTube, and also we'll put it up as a pod as well, so you can tune in as you get ready for Purdue Houston on Friday night in beautiful downtown Indianapolis. Have a great rest of your Wednesday night all. Thanks for watching and taking the time to join us.